Welcome everyone through all time and space to an all-new episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look at anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode will be discussing the 2003 anime Fullmetal Alchemist celebrating its 20th anniversary. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Johnson, and with me is special guest Nick. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, yes. Long time or reacquainted friends hanging out in Discord recently. Didn't know you were such a big anime weeb or otaku, so I'm glad that I could get a real otaku on the podcast for once, because our previous guests have like varying degrees of anime interest, but you know, you're an isekai man, so, and you even have some isekai on your 9 defining anime tastes. So as an introduction, can you run us through your 9 anime?
Yeah, so in no particular order, my favorites are That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, Edge Runners, fantastic if you like cyberpunk as a genre, Hellsing Ultimate, and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, both some of the foundational ones that I watched, Black Lagoon, and Dead Man's Wonderland for some more of a little more action-packed, a little more violent. Vinland Saga, fantastic as far as animation goes, fantastic as far as I like what they do with the plot, the whole coming to terms with revenge. Gundam Wing, another classic that I used to watch when I was a kid, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Just it's fun.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so what really interests me about your list is that a lot of them, well, not a lot of them, but a good majority of them are actually from the last decade. So Vinland Saga, Edge Runner, Slime, and Dead Man Wonderland was 2011 or 2012. But yeah, so like, yeah, you have some more recent anime. So did they get replaced with previous ones, or did these newer ones do something to you that made them worthy to define your taste?
The newer ones were worthy to define my taste, I think, especially in the case of Edge Runners really hit, I don't know, updated Ghost in a Shell kind of cyberpunk for me. I liked the game a lot, and it was very faithful to like aspects of the game that I thought was fun, but also the action sequences and animation around it I really liked the style of, and the story was a solid one, kind of a doomed person, kind of how the game is, you know, you're getting eaten up by the city. And let's see, Vinland Saga, I like Norse stuff, honestly, was how I got into it, and the story is, I don't know, similar to, I guess, Attack on Titan, Cycle of Hatred kind of thing, except the whole cycle is him breaking out of it and choosing to be different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the Vikings have kind of been in a rise in media for like the, not decade, but at least for the half decade with the show. Is the show just called Vikings?
Yeah, it's just Vikings.
Yeah, Vikings. As well as, you know, the God of War coming back with Ragnarok, as well as, I guess, if you want to link it to Thor and the MCU, you can even link it to that. But yeah, Norse mythology is so deep and has so many pathways of storytelling that you can talk about. So yeah, it was just interesting that, especially with Edge Runners, that's from last year, 2020.
Yeah, it was like pretty recent one.
Yeah. So was there another kind of cyberpunk story that you liked beforehand, or oh, you said with the gameplay, but is there like other cyberpunk stories that you appreciate or know of?
Yeah, so I play the tabletops a lot, so I played a lot of Shadowrun, so I'm familiar with the, not necessarily the universe of cyberpunk outside of the games, but I'm familiar with the idea, because Shadowrun and cyberpunk are pretty similar, barring some story elements as far as like how things played out.
Gotcha. So you like the well, it's even in the title, but the cyberpunk aesthetics or tropes of tabletop and storytelling. Okay. Gotcha. And the other one I was curious was Slime as well, since you're a man of cultured isekai taste. Is Slime like your pinnacle or ultimate isekai that you say like kind of exemplifies everything that's good about isekai?
Yeah, I really think it hits the best parts of isekai without, I don't know, I mean, it still has, some of its over the top moments, but it does a good job of having a story that doesn't mount itself to the point where it's you got to jump the shark over and over again, and it's getting to a level that's too crazy.
Hmm.
It seems to be like a good take on what would happen if this scenario played out. Like none of it seems too crazy or like out of the blue.
Right, yeah, the contrivedness of isekai is kind of what you roll your eyes at and when you can't really recommend it to people. But yeah, Slime does seem to be a very balanced story. And did you get a chance to watch the movie?
I actually had not no. I did not know it had a movie.
Then I won't mention it. But yeah, even with its popularities from its light novels and mangas, then we're going to be seeing a lot more Slime in the future. So I'm very hyped for it as well. It was like one of my, other than Welcome to Demon School, Iruma-kun is the other like isekai that I really appreciate, at least in the most recent times when it's like titles that are like 15 or 20 words, or I
Yeah.
was reincarnated as a vending machine, which comes out later this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch that. It's piqued my interest.
Right, yeah, because last year it was like reincarnated as a sword, and then this year was like reincarnated as a vending machine, and it does seem to be at least, even I think I saw recently in the Tekken or Street Fighter 6 demo, there was a refrigerator character or something, so I was like, huh, I wonder if it's going to be like that. He can like infinitely spawn food items inside him and like use them as projectors, but um, projections. But we'll see. I guess
Yeah, that would
maybe
be
that's
interesting.
maybe that we'll be watching over Discord, watching it together. See if we
Yeah.
can have fun watching that. All right, cool. So those are your 9 anime. Very interesting choice. Do you have a favorite JoJo part?
I think Steel Ball Run is probably my favorite.
Okay, yet to be animated. Okay, so got maybe another 10 years before we get to that, but
Yeah, we'll see if it gets around.
right, right. We'll see. All right, cool. So solid 9. I think they're all like above board. They very much paint a picture of the your own personal taste and like you're very action centric and deep storytelling with characters. So I like it. I like it. I like it. All right. So aside from or next to this, we go into a little bit of a broader discussion about why we're talking about Full Metal Alchemist. Because with this 20th anniversary, it's been enough time where we can say, oh, how does it sit inside the culture? But before we get to that, I thought it was best to talk about what are our ideas about it as an adaptation, or I guess the nature of anime being a medium of adaptation. Because with the Japanese production committee, like kind of the Hollywood executives behind the scenes, that a lot of the times animes get approved by their circulation numbers of the written material as well as the popularity of merchandise. So you see a lot of uh, like just talking about the whole wave of the 2010s into the 2020s with the isekai trend. It's like, oh, isekais are blowing up recently.
Oh yeah, they're all over.
Yeah, all over. And we can talk about like the social implications of why people might want to be escaping from the
Yeah.
real world or seeking escapism. But yeah, so I think the best question to start off with is, what do you think makes a good adaptation?
I think it's a tricky balance because after a point you have to stick to the story, but most adaptations don't have the runtime to do it exactly like one for one. So it's really cutting out the parts that are important and like really make it what it is and trying to put them together with enough of everything else to keep the story cohesive and keep like the heart and soul, as it were, of it together, which can be tricky because I mean, adaptations on the whole, I mean, we've all seen bad adaptations of your favorite book, your favorite you know piece of media that you didn't like how they did it because you thought they cut out important pieces.
Right. Yeah. So the heart of it is, I think, yeah, I think it's perfect of what you're saying. It's like, how do you nail down the heart of something, especially if the original creator isn't involved? Because, like, because most, yeah, so it's interesting because most adaptations without the original, creator's input or consultation is basically fan fiction, if you want to think about
Yeah.
it like that. And it's very interesting because we praise adaptations for being faithful or not faithful and saying, oh, this is a good or bad one based off of our own feelings about it. But it's a team of writers that have adapted or have fan fiction written this new thing. So the faithfulness to the source material is like kind of what's the heart of it. So do you feel like if something's more faithful to the original source material that it's a better adaptation, or is the faithfulness even part of it?
Um, I wouldn't say that it makes it better. I've never had a problem when things take IP and then do something different with it. I just don't like it when they take the same characters and they play them in a totally separate direction for seemingly like their own whim. So for me, it comes down to
Yeah.
like when they start tweaking what a character is to make it fit into the story they've made instead of keeping I guess the characters are really what it boils down to for me. The
Mhm.
story overall, I mean, can change, but if you start messing with the characters, you're messing with the motives, and it kind of changed the implications of everything.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, yeah. Like the characters are the heart of a story. I mean, there is always a perfect balance of like location and setting and characters and the plot of the story. But yeah, if you're messing with the characters that are like what attracts, some most people to a story, then it undermines the impact of the story itself. So I think one major topic when it comes to that kind of discussion about what is the heart of a character, and it's not a political issue, even though it feels like it, is that whenever race swapping comes up, and I thought that might be a good talking about what does it mean to stay true to a character, is that if their race is essential to the character, why change it? So do you feel that way, like if it's a forced direction by like whoever's writing it to change the race of a person or some kind of feature of it, it's a bad adaptation inherently?
No, I wouldn't say that unless it's if it is an important part of like the character's arc and it has like a a tangible impact in the story for them, then I think it would be. I wouldn't like it if they changed it if that were the case. But I guess a good example of this that I can think of in a like a recent thing is have you seen The Great on Hulu?
No, I haven't.
It's it's set in Catherine the Great's reign, but it's
Okay.
done like a Broadway plays can be, where it's I mean whoever is best gets the part. The race
Mhm.
doesn't really play into it, and it's just
Mhm.
like not an acknowledged part. Everyone's just being them.
Oh, interesting. So playing historic characters, but it's not matching the race of the original historical character. Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
So
So
like they
like the
have
great.
it's a diverse cast, but they
Gotcha.
are all plot wise like functionally white people because they're in Catherine the Great's Russia.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So, like, whenever that comes up, specifically with comic books, light novels, and adaptations from that kind of sort, it always sticks in my mind about what Stan Lee said about Spider Man is that anyone can be under the mask, and that's kind of the whole point of his character is that anyone could be Spider Man. And I think he echoes that point in Across the Spider Verse, or which was the first one, Into the Spider Verse, Across the Spider Verse?
I believe Into was the first one, and Across is the one that's coming out or is out now.
Yeah, it's out now. Okay, so yeah, Into the Spider Verse. So it's very interesting with superhero stories that a lot of common critiques is like, oh, why don't you tell more stories of different people's backgrounds, or like why introduce characters just to change their race? And yeah, if you're speaking to if that matters with the adaptability of something or making it a good or bad adaptation, if you change the race or even like going down the line of their personality types or adding things in, then it's not a faithful adaptation, but that doesn't mean it's inherently bad. So it's a very interesting situation to be in when it comes to adapting things because most recently, I mean, we can talk about it a little bit, but the whole Little Mermaid,
Oh yeah.
I don't even think what would be the, yeah, I don't, it's sorry, it's just a weird uh, talking point because okay, so they changed this, but why is Disney doing this? And that was kind of the whole point of the whole advent of the story. It's like, okay, why change this one element that doesn't impact the story too much, or it doesn't define Ariel as a character? So why do that? So very interesting, being faithful to source materials as a topic. But moving on from that, because I wanted to run through other adaptations to see if how you feel about them, if their changes were good, if you're a kind of I'm Marvel, I'm Marvel, I'm a anime only, or I'm one of those people that say the manga's better kind of people. So wanted to run through a couple examples of anime that has changed from the manga and see how you feel about them. Yeah, so not light spoilers or heavy spoilers, depending on them. These are the popular, changes to animes that most people will know. But how do you feel about the ending of Death Note? How it changed from the manga, if you know about that?
I do not. This is one blind spot I have in anime. I have never finished watching Death Note.
Oh,
I know
interesting.
like the gist of the story from
Mhm.
just general exposure, but yeah, that one just never really like grabbed me.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, yeah. So anime is a little bit, well, not notorious, but it has been a feature as is a medium of adaptations that you can change the ending, you can add original content or what most fans call filler episodes, as well as a complete diversion from the plot. And we'll get to Full Metal Alchemist in a little bit, but something that's like maybe most people don't know is that the whole diversion in Full Metal Alchemist from its source material or manga was at the request of the writer itself, for how she was adamant to the production team at Studio Bones to say, "Oh, can you make an anime original ending and not follow my story?" So I think that's something that gets really left out of the narrative when talking about Full Metal Alchemist specifically. But other anime, are you familiar with Tokyo Ghoul's differences? Okay,
Not familiar with the differences, but I have watched all of Tokyo Ghoul. I have not read the manga.
gotcha. Okay, how do you feel about it? Because like the common complaint is that season two is a misstep.
Um, I think season two, I liked it. I won't say that it's like a complete misstep. I think it kind of takes the punch out of the ending of the first, but it
Oh,
does
okay.
fill in some gaps that are interesting.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so that was just a case of something being out of order or misplaced to how the general anime audience and even manga community was expecting it to go. So yeah, I don't think it gets a lot of hate for not being adapted properly, but it is one of those things like if you maybe watch it through that it's a little bit more understandable, and then in retrospective works. But I'm also one of those people that don't do well with the gore, so I have
Oh yeah, that is that's very fair. That is
yeah,
one of
shied away
those.
from Tokyo Ghoul. All right, so another one is Bleach. How do you feel about specifically? This is a case where a lot of the anime original episodes were in to buff out the writing time of the manga. So, how do you feel about the Bleach original content diverging from the manga?
I don't think it was. I think it was fine. I filler has its place, and as long as you do interesting stuff with the filler and it doesn't like completely blow out the story that you're going for, I think it's all right. I mean, I get that not everyone's going to want to watch it. Like, it's the case of Naruto and the skip these like seasons slash dozens of episodes because they move the plot forward 0%. But that said, some people are really here for it, so it's each their own.
It's very interesting because if you look at through again with Bleach resurfacing after 10 years, that a lot. If you go back through like the popularity of it, it does seem like these anime original episodes did lead to the decline of its popularity, and maybe justifies why it was stopped or it was stopped in production for that reason. So I think it's one of those historical reflections like, oh, if maybe they didn't do that, Bleach would have still continued on to, be, produced with the big three. But yeah, maybe that's kind of like left in the dark about, the official story of it. But yeah, it's really interesting in that way. So another one would be Shaman King, and again around the same time period. So like I think there are three specific anime in this early 2000s was Fullmetal Alchemist, Shaman King, and Soul Eater were three kind of different examples of adaptations that kind of had mixed uh, reviews and critiques about being faithful to their source material. So did you finish or remember Shaman King?
I don't think I've seen Shaman King, but I have seen all of Soul Eater a couple times.
Oh, nice. Okay, so yeah, we can skip over Shaman King, but it's very interesting. After 20 years, Shaman King came back with a more faithful adaptation and to conclude with how the manga concluded. So I'll leave that to the sideline. But yeah, so interesting about Soul Eater is that it diverged very, not quickly, but at least diverged significantly enough from the manga. So how do you feel about the anime itself?
Um, I really liked it. I thought it was fun. It's definitely a shonen. It has those tropes and they're pretty heavy. I love the art style of it. Um, the stylistic choices of the world and the characters were really fun to me.
Mhm. Yeah, it gets forgotten, I think, very easily because it was in the whole Toonami run, or at least, growing up in the 2000s. This was like one of those animes that's not fell by the wayside, but kind of got thrown into the mix and just got buried. But yeah, and most recently with Fire Force, again, by the same author, kind of was put on not indefinite hiatus, but for David Productions doing so much work around it, Fire Force kind of just fell off like with popularity. So it is coming back for a season three later this year or in
No.
2024. But yeah, I was very uh, not. I was worried that it was going to follow the same way of Soul Eater, that it was going to have a original anime ending and kind of leave out a lot of significant points that the manga covered. But that's okay, and Soul Eater's good stuff. So, other things maybe to talk about with the same kind of changing the ending of a anime to match what the production team wanted was Fruits Baskets. Are you a Fruits Baskets man?
I am not.
Gotcha. Okay. So the big thing about Fruit Baskets is that it just concluded early. So there was no epilogue to the story, basically. So it kind of got cut off.
Oh, so it just
Uh,
kind of got left hanging.
no, like there's a definitive point where in the manga where you can say, "Oh, happy ever after," and then there's
Oh,
a
okay.
few more chapters of an epilogue. So the more recent 2021, I think it was very recent, 2 years ago, very recent. But yeah, recent edition of it came back again after 20 years to have the story be more faithful to the manga ending. All right, cool. And we had a previous episode on Usagi Drop, and that's a very unknown anime, but I thought it was worth bringing up here again as an adaptation because it's a very interesting story where the anime concludes where the manga concludes, but, well, sorry, it's the same situation of Fruits Baskets where it closes off a few chapters early because Usagi Drop is a very wholesome slice of life anime where a, adoptive father, adopts his daughter and going through the struggle of being a new parent, and that's where the story ends off with like, okay, it's the we've gotten this together. You're my daughter. He's her father. And then the manga concludes with a very pro grooming kind of message. So, looking at adaptations again, the question of what is a good adaptation? Do you think it's okay for studios to change an ending or to cut things off where it kind of gets a little divergent from what it was originally?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that there's that's kind of the crux of adaptation. Like, would I say it's bad because they cut it off at a point that I don't like, or otherwise, just it was convenient for them, the money ran out, etc. Um, I usually like it if they at least put somewhat of a bow on it, so there's at least like kind of a conclusive end to the story if there is meant to be one. But I don't think they have to just leave it on a cliff instead of ending it if it's gonna come to an end regardless.
So going back to the Marvel MCU parallel, I guess, because it's very interesting. Like when you start breaking down how all the way up to Infinity War and Endgame kind of resolved itself. Do you think the exclusion of Endgame is a good ending to the MCU? Again, so like if you got up to Infinity War, the ending where see Thanos looking off into the sunset, do you think that would have been a satisfying ending, or even a like when you get to that point, like now you're talking about satisfaction of the story concluding, but do you think that's left on a cliffhanger, or do you think that's a actual solid ending? You're like, oh, okay, if the MCU ends with this movie, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think maybe a hot take. I think that would have been a fine ending. Like, I don't necessarily think that the good guys always have to win. Like, he had his arc. He did what he wanted to do, what he thought was right, and he got it done. And he did it at the expense of the heroes.
All right, so the final case of adaptations just wanted to bring up was when there are anime originals and then they have mangas that follow. So I think the most key one of this category would have been Cowboy Bebop. So iconic, classic, everyone knows it. So have you gotten a chance to read the Cowboy Bebop manga?
I did not know it had a manga.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, okay. So won't spoil that. Again, we were going light heavy to spoilers into this, but yeah, the manga does wrap up the story a little bit differently, and I think that's why the live action adaptation by Netflix was a little bit not what fans want it, because it does lean into more of how the manga concludes versus how the anime concludes. So they had to rework a lot of the build up to a manga ending. So it's just very interesting when you look at adaptations again. Where do they actually get their
Source material?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, okay, if you only knew Cowboy Bebop had an anime, then you're like, oh, this is not the Cowboy Bebop I wanted.
That actually explains a lot. I was kind of generally confused about why they went that direction, and knowing this, yeah, that makes it make a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Netflix has been on a very interesting tear with adaptations from anime, especially with, I think the most notable one that they did was the Death Note one, where they cast Lakeith Stanfield as L. And I don't know the actor that played Light. His face confuses me, but yeah, it's very interesting
Was it
to.
Defoe?
He played Ryu, but yeah, it's that story, and it's interesting that when you take specifically with Death Note, I think it works on a country basis, that you can't take that story and then put it in America, which the Netflix adaptation did. I think that was what really undermined that over the acting or the writing, or I think it's one of those core tenets that you were talking about, is that if they're no longer Japanese, then it's like it's not as shocking or as a revelation of what the original source material was trying to get at. So yeah, that might be one of those cases like, oh yeah, stories can also be country specific or people.
Have to do with like a region and
Yeah, like the culture behind it as well. All right, cool. So that was all the broad foreplay before the main talk about Fullmetal Alchemist. So a little background on Fullmetal Alchemist before we get into it, so everyone's on the same page. But this is a 2003 anime that released on October 4th, so we're right above the 20th anniversary. Total of 51 episodes, and it also had a conclusion or a concluding movie in The Conqueror of Shambhala in 2005. This was a anime done by Studio Bones, very known studio. And what's most notable with the production team was its director and writer. The director was Seiji Matsushima, who was an episode director on Eva or Evangelion. He directed Shaman King in 2001, and he followed up with Gundam 00 or Double O after Fullmetal Alchemist. And the writer was Sho Akikawa, and he wrote on Love Hina. He was also the writer on Shaman King, 2001. And then he followed up Fullmetal Alchemist with Samurai Deeper Kyo. So the Well, one of the most notable things about Fullmetal Alchemist is that it's done by a female manga artist. That is Hiromu Akikawa or Arikawa, and she's kind of the standing example of like female mangakas writing shonen. Again, it's not so popular, but she kind of stands at the head or the prime example of female manga writers writing in shonen. So the story basically follows the adventures of the Elric brothers, Alphonse and Edward, Edward being the older brother, Alphonse being the younger brother, who are in search of the Philosopher's Stone to basically restore their bodies after they have lost them in a failed attempt to transmute their dead mother back to life. And I'm laughing because people always, or at least a lot of anime fans, say that Fullmetal Alchemist is a good starter anime, and that is such a brutal concept to pass on to people. Oh yeah, first episode you see children lose their arms and legs and bodies trying to bring back their dead mother. Specifically with the original series where it's like really brutally depicted, because that's something that gets overwritten in its sequel series with Brotherhood. But going into this rewatch, Nick, what were your initial thoughts revisiting it?
Having watched Brotherhood a number of times, this was probably one of the first anime I ever watched. I think it was on Netflix. I don't know, when I was a kid in like high school. I ended up watching through the original, and coming back to it, what really struck me most about it is the tone. There seems to be a big difference in tone between Brotherhood and 2003.
Oh, it was totally different. So, like, lighthearted, or how would you describe it?
I think Brotherhood is a lot more lighthearted, even in the more grim parts of the show, and the 2003 really um, impresses the gravity of the situations more. It feels like to me, like they don't shy away from the darker parts of what is going on as much, and the characters seem to feel the weight of their varying actions more.
Gotcha. So it feels very weighty. Yeah, and that can even you can even extend that to even that opening scene of showing, or whenever they flash back to what happens with their mother, like she gets, and again, of course, slight spoilers with this, but when you see their, because they attempt to resurrect her, but in Brotherhood, and I think you've watched Brotherhood way more than me, but you don't actually see what is produced when they do attempt to bring her back, right?
You can see like the shadow of it. You don't see it as explicitly as you do in 2003. Like you can still kind of make out what it is, but it's not as like you don't get the full on view of it.
Right. Yeah. So like it's like showing the monster versus just hinting at it. Yeah, because in the 2003 version, like they you can see like pulsating and like it crawls away with a blood trail, and when they go to revisit the house it's like the blood is stained into the floorboards. So yeah, I guess I didn't really catch on to the darker tone of it. So maybe speaking to that and why that is that at the time of the pre-production for the anime, so the manga started in July 2001, and the anime released in October 2023. Sorry, 2023, 2003. So that was basically from the start of the manga and its weekly release to its anime production. There was only 4 volumes of the anime at the time, and again, light spoilers, but chapter or the volume 4 ends with the death of Maze Hughes. So if they were talking for pre-production timing, all they had was up to that point to make all 51 episodes. So if you're ending your story with that kind of point, or at least starting your story out with the death of this major character, it would inherently be darker. It's like, oh yeah, the fun-loving dad with a daughter and
Yeah.
wife. It's like, oh yeah, gets brutally murdered
Yeah, that was like one of the first gut punches of the, well, not the first, I guess,
Mhm.
considering what comes before it, but that was one of the larger gut punches throughout the series.
Right, yeah, so that's a gut punch, and like that kind of sells you on how dark the story can be. And again, that point of like, okay, where's the heart of the story? And if you think that's the heart of it, then you're not going to go into how goofy as get Ed is with like his little caricature moments or outrage. Because again, Full Metal ran for 27 volumes in total, so they only had basically 20% of the story outlined for them to take it into a certain direction. Because generally, with the rule of anime, is that you need 7 chapters, or sorry, 7 volumes to make a 50 episode run, or uh, two 24 episode runs, essentially. So when you break it down like that, okay, so I'm like, okay, rethinking about my rewatch, it was like, yeah, I guess I was kind of numb to it because like one of my favorite animes is Psychopaths, and even though I don't like yeah. Even though I don't like gore, it's like it works with that kind of story. And I never thought about it because when you go into alchemy, you already know the dark history of alchemy. If you do, it's like, oh, bringing humans back to life, doing crazy things with the human body or other species, splicing things together, exploring anatomies. So it's like, okay, it's already inherently a mystical dark science. So yeah, I'm buying into that. All right, so your initial thoughts about that. So you didn't get a chance to watch the movie, correct? Okay, cool. Yeah, so we can not skip over the rest of the anime just yet. Yeah, let's save the ending for the ending. But yeah, do you think there are strengths to the OG series more than the Brotherhood?
Um, while they touch on it throughout, the different things that the characters have to carry, especially, I don't know if Mustang story in 2003 versus Brotherhood is which is more faithful to the manga, but I think that him specifically, he has I think his story in 2003 is stronger, as in Brotherhood he's kind of got the same, he carries the same weight as the other state alchemists, more or less.
So he's kind of, do you think it's like a sidelining of not knowing how important he is? Because I think that's what really the differences come down to. It's like not knowing where their story goes. So it doesn't feel like it needs to pay off, I guess, in Brotherhood because you have such a huge cast of connected characters. But like specifically with Mustang and the OG, like you like how his story wraps or how it progresses more?
Yeah, I like the direction it takes. It sets him out. I mean, because his whole shtick in Brotherhood is, I want to, and also in 2003, like, I want to become the fear and like fix things, essentially, make it a democracy, etc. He in 2003, he has to live not only with what all the state alchemists did, but also like what he specifically did under orders. And I think that adds like a little bit of extra flavor to his desire to atone and fix things.
Gotcha. Maybe leading into more of that darker tone because he's they say it so much, dog of the military, but he's also a flame alchemist. So there's always a military parallel when you're telling stories like this, but being a death soldier, especially when we talk about Shambhala, is that a lot of that story takes place in Germany. So like the parallels are clear to what the mangaka was trying to parallel. So like being a flamethrower soldier on the battlefield of World War II. So yeah, specifically how dark that is to burn someone alive. Specifically, it's not even explosions; it's literally burning people alive. So yeah, it kind of plays a little bit more into the gruesome nature of his power in the OG one. So, other than that, Mustang, any other characters you think are either done better or you like more?
I think the homunculi are done in a, I think maybe more interesting, um, kind of existential crisis situation in 2003, whereas in Brotherhood they're, I don't know, more akin to pawns, powerful pawns, and like interestingly fleshed out in and of themselves. But I liked how 2003 handled the homunculi as a whole.
Because like they're not just simple. Yeah, you said pawns, but again, not trying to spoil anything too much about Brotherhood or this one either. But yeah, they're stepping stones in Brotherhood essentially, and this and the OG they get kind of backgrounds. They get moments of even vulnerability. They kind of get fleshed out, and they're a little bit more tied intrinsically to the story of Alphonse and Elric, as well as the other characters in the world. Specifically, that there is one factor that kind of the production team for the anime wrote in that the original mangaka didn't do, is that the homunculus are the leftovers, or they are the summonings of people that have failed at human transmutation. And how do you feel like, maybe leaning again into that darker tone, do you feel like that's a more powerful theme, that the homunculus are reflections of our quote unquote good characters?
I think that's, yeah, I liked that a lot. I thought that paying for the sin of trying to reincarnate, or re resurrect, I suppose, someone, is you essentially resurrect yourself as someone else
Hmm.
or parts thereof.
Hmm.
So inadvertently, I suppose that you kind of meet your goal. You just lose your existence, as it were.
Did you see, I forgot if it came out in 2017 or 16, but Dororo? It's a samurai story. Yeah, so there's a moment that calls back, or not even calls back, but maybe pay homages to that idea of living with a wrongdoing and then paying it back, but specifically with body parts as well as incorporated into that. So it's very interesting when you kind of make the story a little bit more intimate. So did you like that more intimacy, or do you think that's true that the OG is a little bit more intimate to the Elrics as well as the characters?
I think so. It feels like Brotherhood has, it's just such a large cast. It feels a little less intimate, a little less personal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas 2003, with they keep it smaller. It seems very Elric focused,
Mm-hmm.
and again with the homunculi playing into it, it's interesting to the implications of that for them as opposed to what happens in Brotherhood.
Thinking about maybe a strength of the OG, is that how did they use pacing versus, because like if they're telling the same story inside the same episode allotment, then like did you feel that at all, that it's better paced, or is that a strength of it or a weakness of it?
I thought it was interesting how Brotherhood handled aspects of the story.
Mhm.
Um, Specifically, they include a lot of the same characters, but gloss over parts that were um, in the OG in 2003.
Mhm.
A good example being the mining town.
Oh, right, okay.
And I think those parts of the story that aren't in Brotherhood kind of don't impress on you what people, how people feel about the state itself. Brotherhood seems to keep it so centric on the military that you don't get a lot of the outside view of what, how they are perceived by the rest of the people in the country.
Hmm.
And the pacing, I think, is pretty even for both of them.
Hmm.
Uh, I checked; it's 64 episodes for Brotherhood. But yeah, I feel like they keep a similar pace. They just choose to explore different parts of the story in some cases.
Gotcha, that's fair. Because I mean, I think one of the big add-ons to, and what kind of sells you to the parallels that exist between the characters, especially for the OG, was the fake Elric brothers. I actually don't remember their names, but it's like, oh, okay, if they're going down the same path, and then it's the Elric brothers' jobs to make sure that, these two brothers don't fall into the same path, as well as, Ed deals a lot more with his own arrogance in the OG, I think. Um, how do you feel about that as like Egg's character? Because again, it is a two-man lead story, but Edward is the force that he. It does seem to be like that. Well, he's carrying the guilt of what happened to his younger brother, of course, but it also seemed like even though they share equal responsibility in that attempt because they're equally gifted, it does seem like as Ed being the elder brother, he does take on the responsibility of, oh, I shouldn't have allowed my younger brother to follow me down this path. So, do you think that's a little bit more of a stated character flaw in Ed, his like arrogance for alchemy, or so I guess my question would be like, how do you think the whole motif of science and religion plays out in Ed in the OG versus Brotherhood?
I think in the OG he has to confront his arrogance a lot more, like you said, and like in especially in the case of those brothers, like I recall the elder brother saying that like I could take a page from you, like you're looking out for your younger brother. Um, at the end of their meeting. Uh, as far as Brotherhood, I think it's just a an aspect of it being a I don't know, for lack of a better term, a little bit zanier than 2003. They keep him kind of still arrogant and a little wilder for comedic effects. But there are points even in Brotherhood where he has to, realize that he's not the biggest fish in the pond, and despite how fancy he is, he can be getting himself and his brother into real danger.
Yeah, so yeah, it's always just seemed to be a situation of, well, I think the biggest tragedy when it comes to talking about the OG or the 2003 one is that people just overlook it as being, inferior to the Brotherhood version of it. And speaking to that fact that maybe the OG's forgotten or just, it's not even mid, it's just like no one thinks of it anymore. So, where do you side on that? Do you think that it's just Brotherhood is a better story? Like, that's not maybe not the most appropriate adjective, but yeah, how do you feel when you compare these two since you're such a big Brotherhood fan?
I really think that they are both great. They just do different things
Mm-hmm.
with the story. They do different things better with the same story. And especially given that didn't have nearly as much when they started '03 as opposed to Brotherhood. I think they did a solid job with it, and there's a lot of things that they fleshed out in 2003 that I mean people overlook but are like intrinsically a part of Brotherhood, like Yoki's whole arc.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't really see one as better than the other. I think they're both good, and it's just a case of different things got done uh, with each of them. I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the good aspects of both.
Yeah, so yeah, I was asking that because I'm assuming you saw the OG first and then Brotherhood, right? Yeah, so why is Brotherhood on your list instead of the OG?
I originally had them both on, but I sided with as I was running through all of them to try and like pick out some of my favorites. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to have both on there, and Brotherhood I will say is the one that I have seen the most. It's enjoyable, and I just kind of chose it because it's the one I've watched more. If I'm gonna be honest,
It has that rewatchability because it's more lighthearted.
yeah, it's something easy to put on, watch. Like it's fun. It's a little zanier.
Yeah, it's like something. Yeah, so like yeah, so when people say like Fullmetal Alchemist is like something you can introduce to newbies or it's like a good first anime, yeah, it's definitely Brotherhood because like I hold them equally in my mind. It's like you said, they do different things, but yeah, the Full Metal Alchemist OG in 2003, I wouldn't introduce, but yeah, Brotherhood does take a lot of the luxuries of a comedy more, and the first is a little bit more horror or psychological because when you go into even the smaller aspects of seeing like transmutation, it does happen a few times in the OG that it's more horrific. So like you see a lot of blood and gore and like bleeding and dismembering. It's just like just yeah. I guess you were right. It's dark. I guess it didn't really clock with me because I was like, oh, I've seen this before. So
That's why it was so like stark to me. Having watched Brotherhood so many times, I went back to it and I was like, wow, this really hits differently than Brotherhood does by like a lot. And like I guess the only notable thing I can think of in Brotherhood that's like as horrifying is the, I want to say, blowback or feedback that the priest gets in Lior.
oh right, okay, yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because like that gets extended out in the OG, or no, sorry, that gets just kind of not washed over, but yeah, it's kind of downplayed. But then other moments are upplayed because you have moments like getting trapped in Gluttony's stomach. Specifically, it's like, oh yeah, a river of blood, or something from
Oh,
Dark Souls, or a lake of blood, and then
yeah.
same thing with like Envy's transformations. It's like a lot more horrific of like, oh, there's souls trapped inside of Envy. Talking a little bit about those strengths of the OG, can you talk about some of the weaknesses that you saw?
Some of the characters didn't get developed as much as they do in Brotherhood, whether
Mhm.
that be a consequence of uh, lack of source material or just the smaller cast, I suppose.
Mhm.
But you get a little bit more out of.
Well, one weakness, it maybe directs your thinking a little bit on this, but I thought Archer as a character is pretty weak. Because again, he gets introduced as this semi foil, not in the same way as Scar is this foil, but again, looking at characters that they introduced or original characters, same thing with the fake Edward brothers. Is that Archer as a character? Do you think he was a good part of the story addition, or was he like a did he detract from it?
I didn't love him, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
He seemed to be there in 2003 to just like really drive the whole military aspect of things and like why that there are still people that are okay with the brutality are present.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt kind of heavy handed because I mean you see it with all the other characters, like clearly the things happened that happened because of this intrinsic part of the military, but having him show up to just kind of stomp it home was, yeah, I don't think it added a ton.
Right, yeah, because he was the avatar of that very militaristic thinking of like putting people into columns and categories and calculating their values, and like the military operates on rules and order. So yeah, it's kind of way more heavy-handed. So it's like the weakness of that is that his character doesn't stand out because it's just so stark in the black of the story
Yeah,
versus everyone. Because Full Metal Alchemist is a inherently gray story. So when you have like a black character, it can be done very well. Because even if you, again, trying not to compare the two, but even with Father, when you get into his not upbringing, but his backstory, you're like, oh, okay, he's pathetic. He's like all powerful. Let me hold this sun in my hand, kind of guy. But he's also, I'm going to tear up because I was wrong.
yeah. At the end of the day, he's still, a small little thing. He still sees himself as a small little thing.
So yeah, I think Archer is one of those weaknesses in the OG. But anything else comes to mind, weakness wise?
I don't know if it's a weakness. Um, I have to say that I like how they did greed, or sorry, not greed, pride,
Mm-hmm.
a lot better
Mm-hmm.
in Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, let's see some other things.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about it because like I only have Archer as one, and I was like, are there any weaknesses in this show? So maybe that's maybe the more relevant question is like, are there any weaknesses in this show? It's just not Brotherhood,
Yeah, that I guess that's the other thing. It's not really a fair comparison to make.
right?
Most of my nitpicks that I have with anime in general, like pacing or
Mm-hmm.
like weird filler or stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really apply here. Like their 2003 had a little bit of filler, but I mean it still felt relevant.
Mm-hmm.
It gave you like a cool, complete story that, while it didn't really impact the larger scope of things, fleshed out Ed now a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's like one of those things is like it gets again, I think I'm just speaking generally about, the anime community because, it's so huge. You can't really get a good assessment or a consensus on anything for sure, except for like really bad hot takes.
Yeah.
But yeah, FMA, I guess, I think I said this at the beginning, but it's like a tragedy. It's like it's kind of lost in the mix of being A tier anime, but when you're talking about it against Brotherhood, it's like S tier. So why go visit a deviation of the story when you can just get the story? And I think that's the kind of thing that gets forgotten about FMA because it's like it's been replaced in everyone's mind. Because like, oh, I say FMA is my favorite anime, and they'll say, oh yeah, mine too. Oh, what do you like about it? And they're like, oh, and then they start talking about Brotherhood, and they like, oh, you mean
Yeah.
the original? So like one of those cases because like we see, especially within the 2020s, we're getting a lot more revisits to old properties. We just had Trigun Stampede. We might be getting a new Hunter x Hunter next year because it's been 10 years since the second edition of that. Same thing with Berserk now that the mangaka has passed away, and there's really iffy information if it's going to continue or it's going to be wrapped up very soon, especially with paying tribute in Elden Ring for the mangaka and how its resurgence kind of like maybe stoked the idea of like, oh, giving it to Mappa or giving it to what was the other studio I was thinking about? But yeah, like Mappa for handling the animations and getting a good proper adaptation of Berserk. Oh, we didn't even talk about Berserk, but we don't have to talk about
I
that.
I've seen I know of it because you also know Nick, not me. For for everyone listening, I've got a good bit of exposure to Berserk through him.
So the original like 1990s one and then the one in the early 2010s basically just overlaid a lot of CGI when it was not necessary. It was kind of like wonky CGI for the time, and they were trying to push the envelope. Where CGI now in the 2020s is a lot better, especially when you look at Trigun Stampede. But anyways, moving on from that. But yeah, so like the weaknesses of FMA is like only that it's compared to Brotherhood. So it's funny in that situation. So the other thing, specifically when we revisit 10-year-old animes, or in this case 20 years old, is do you think after rewatching it, do you feel like it's aged? Do you feel like it's a product of a time, or did you see like it was noticeably not a modern anime?
I tend towards liking the older style animation. Not that I love newer animation too, like Edge Runners, how they ended up doing like a lot of the different things, like the hyperspeed movement and stuff like that. That kind of meld old style and new was really cool. But I think the only thing that I saw that made it aged was the fact that I could only watch it in I can't remember it doesn't have like a HD adaptation. But beyond that, like I didn't see any like aspects of the animation that were markedly.
Yeah, I think there's just small things of being early 2000s with like the color palette and just being yeah. So like there's like general things to be indicative of the time, but it's not that it's old or like there is like a animation style behind it. But yeah, like specific and even talking about Edge Runners a little bit more. That's done by Studio Trigger, and Studio Trigger's only been around for like 10 years. Where the first was Kill a Kill in 2000. It was pretty 2010s or late 2000 double O's. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, and if it holds up still, that's probably because Studio Bones just put a lot of money into it, and again, leading into like, oh, it wasn't that the studio decided to just diverge from the story. It was literally at the request of the mangaka that she said that, oh, my story, you literally can't do my anime. You can't do an adaptation of my anime because I have another 9 years, or sorry, at the time it would have been 5 more years of manga to release. So yeah, you have the right to adapt my story, but just know I'm not going to sign off on it because you're not going to wait for me to finish my manga, which I do applaud her for, going out of her way to say that. Because that's not the case with the most mangakas. Like, most recently, Ishikawa or Ishiyami, who is the creator of Attack on Titan, is like intimately uh, integrated into the production of Attack on Titan, and he said that the Attack on Titan anime is the most accurate representation of his story. And don't read the manga, but like he says, like if you want my story, then it's the anime. So it's very interesting that you can have two diverse opinions about that. It's like, oh, I'm not going to wait versus I'm going to be intimately involved inside its creation. So it is the story that I want to see. So it's nice that she did stand up on that, and it's good that other mangakas are either being integrated into the animation process, or they are being properly compensated inside of, or at least accepting of ideas. So the last question is, the anime does not actually conclude with episode 51. It does leave off within like a 105-minute movie, but I don't think there's any need to spoil it. It's just so divergently different than what you might think, so I don't want to spoil it for anyone, or even you. We can maybe talk about it off the podcast, but we can just skip it. But I would say that, how do you feel? Actually, let's talk about that. How do you feel with episode 51, how it finishes overall?
I didn't hate it, but it is not my favorite conclusion. Um, it adds a very interesting color to alchemy as a whole
Mm-hmm.
in the original.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it also raises the question of like, it kind of makes them all hypocrites to an extent, especially Ed and Al, who like they don't want to kill anybody, they don't want to hurt anybody, but at the end of the day, they have been doing that without their knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they're rightly horrified by this. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about the differences between father's character and the whole exploring of.
Dante.
Yes, I thought it
Okay.
was an interesting. I thought it was in line with 2003. It was a good way to wrap that one up.
Because I do think it's a lot stronger with the idea of that everyone is complicit. Because like if that militarism is a thing, like you can't be the citizen of a country and then look the other way for what your military does. And I think that's something that gets overlooked with it. And Attack on Titan gets talked about as like a political statement, and I think that was a lot of the negative criticism to it. But Fullmetal Alchemist, especially the OG one, is way more
Oh
political,
yeah.
especially specifically with the ending, because I do like the ending because, and maybe talking a little bit about the movie, or a little bit lead into talking about the movie, but it's the idea that you can't just think military action is good. You can't think that aggression in that kind of form or military force is a good thing. Like power, one, corrupts and also is abused, and there are victims on both sides of things, but also that whenever you're the winner of something, you know that there's going to be a loser. So it does sell that idea a little bit more. And I again, not to say that one is better than the other, but I think there is a consistent through line with the OG. And I think, again, talking about the strengths of the series, like that sells the idea specifically at the end of 51. So I do think it's a good ending, but I see the need for why the movie came out, to kind of tie everything up with a bow, like you said. So, all right, cool. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall good. So coming to the last question, so we always ask about three questions of like, this age and the animation, what are the strengths and weaknesses, and the final question is, would you recommend Full Metal Alchemist 2003?
I think especially for fans of Brotherhood, it's something you should watch because it is a whole different coloring of the story and the characters, and I feel like they do a lot of different stuff in the OG.
enough to separate it from Brotherhood. Yeah,
Yeah. And like you'll see parts of the OG that you then can like swap into like blanks in Brotherhood. So I would recommend it to anyone that liked Brotherhood, and honestly anyone that's likes anime. It's a pretty solid choice. As you said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as an opener, but
and okay, so it's like a recommend with some asterisks, but yeah, it's probably not a good first anime. Do you think there's like an age requirement? Because it still counts as a shonen, but it's technically a dark shonen. Do you think there's a age barrier to it as well?
I mean, I probably wouldn't show it to like my little cousins under, I don't know, 13 or so, but
But you
yeah,
can show
I feel
Brotherhood
like
to them.
oh yeah, for sure. Because I mean, it's like they cut out a lot of the dark parts in Brotherhood, and a lot of the blood and stuff is just more so
Hmm.
implied than existent.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think I was very caught off by revisiting this, so that even talking with you, I was kind of like I wasn't keyed into how dark it was because I kind of remembered it as being dark. But again, I've only seen Brotherhood one time through, but I've seen this one at least three times through. So it is my, I don't know if preferred is the right word, but I do like how, yeah, again, the strongest part of it is like, I like how intimate you get with the homunculus specifically because it's really sad.
Yeah, it's really kind of
Yeah,
a
it
rough.
didn't reveal any of their identities or who they're connected to, but it's like, yeah, you are, and I think you said it perfectly, you're living with your sins and you have to deal with them, you have to face them head on. And it does pull in like one of my favorite characters, Izumi, Zumi Curtis into the story a little bit more as well. Like again, like with Brotherhood, you get a larger cast and you get introduced to other countries and another cast of characters. So there's so much to juggle. But the OG, it's just like, oh, these characters, and same thing like with the. I think the only thing that, again, going back to the weaknesses, maybe a little bit as we wrap up, so I think what gets handled better in specifically with the starting or the introduction of the story is the Nina Tucker arc gets handled better in Brotherhood than it is in the OG. Yeah, but other than that, I think they are very diversely different. But again, it's a fan fiction, and I think they did a good enough heart of it, even though they didn't know how deep the characters were going or how much of the world was out there. But it's a recommend for me. All right, cool. So that wraps up our discussion of the 20th anniversary of Fullmetal Alchemist, which, if you look at the romanization of the kanji, it's also Alchemist of Steel.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if that's a better title versus Full Metal, but I do like Edward's closing quote or his monologue in Brotherhood, talking about why he's called Full Metal or what that really means to have a full metal heart specifically. So I was like, oh, cool, that's cute. But yeah, Alchemist of Steel is also. I think that works. Do you think that works?
I think that works.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, because there's no Full Metal. But anyways, all right, cool. So that wraps up our discussion. So Nick, thank you for coming on. How did you find the podcast?
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Do you know any 2014 or 2004 anime that you might want to come back on for?
I will have to look. Not off the top of my head, but I'll have to look. I'd be happy to come back on for some stuff. I'll have to look at some the dates on some of the anime.
All right, awesome, awesome. Yeah, because in 2003 we also had Naruto premiere, and I think that's the other big one in 2003, but I can't be sure. And I didn't know how to handle Naruto because that's such a. I have some very hot takes on Dragon Ball, but I also have some hot takes on Naruto. So might get a group of people to talk about Naruto and see how it stands in the the shonen tier list. But yeah, so closing off with Full Metal Alchemist, do you think it's fair to say it's an A or an S? And then is Brotherhood an A or an S?
I'd say they're both solid A's.
Ooh, both solid A's. Okay, that's perfect. Different stories, but different demographics, tonality. I think tone is kind of the selling point of it. But okay, sure. All right, so that's it. Thank you for coming on. If you liked this episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.